My aunt thought she could ruin my grandfather's life's work, so I went behind her back to expose the truth, then watched her face as she realized she had lost. I was 17 when everything I knew turned to ash. Grandpa Joe died on a Tuesday morning. One second, he was under a Honda teaching me to diagnose engine problems by sound alone. The next, he was on the concrete, unable to speak. The stroke was massive. We buried him in the rain while I stood there thinking about how just last week he'd promised me his 1967 Mustang for my 18th birthday. At the will reading, my father's face went from confusion to devastation as the lawyer announced everything went to Aunt Michelle. 20 years my dad had bled for that auto repair shop. 20 years of opening at 5 a.m. and closing after dark. 20 years of keeping us afloat when the recession nearly killed every small business on our street. And Aunt Michelle? She'd been in California for a decade until 6 months ago when she suddenly moved back to help with Dad's health. The next morning, she rolled up in her Tesla with Oscar, her business partner, who walked through our shop like he already owned it. Within minutes, he was talking about hemorrhaging money and restructuring while moving his stuff into Grandpa's office. My dad got demoted to senior mechanic in his own family's shop. Oscar's first move was firing Carlos, who'd worked there 20 years because we needed to cut overhead. Then came the eviction notice for our apartment above the shop. We were cited code violations we'd never heard of. Only 60 days to get out. Mom started working double shifts at the hospital while Dad's shoulders got more slumped every day. I quit basketball to work at the shop unpaid, watching Oscar bring in mechanics who overcharged customers and pocketed cash. One of our regulars came to me crying because Oscar tried to charge her $2,000 for a transmission when she just needed fluid. I showed my parents receipts proving Oscar was stealing, but they were too exhausted to fight. Every night I texted Grandpa's old number updates about how Oscar was destroying everything we'd built. Dad still arrived at 5 a.m. to drink coffee alone in the empty shop, refusing to let Oscar sell Grandpa's tools. Under a tarp and back sat the Mustang that Dad and I had been restoring together. It was the only time he seemed alive anymore. When summer came up, I asked if we could use the shoplift one Saturday to install the exhaust. For the first time in months, Dad actually smiled. Then Oscar announced he'd found a buyer for the Mustang. $30,000 would keep us operational another quarter, and the car was registered to the business, not personal property. I begged Dad to fight, but he was drunk and broken. He screamed that Grandpa made promises he couldn't keep and left us with nothing. That night, I heard Oscar telling someone to move the car before the kid does something stupid. At 4 a.m., I came back to the shop, figuring I'd take what was mine. The Mustang started on the second try, but Oscar's BMW blocked the gate. He called it theft while I called it taking my inheritance. The police came and Oscar filed a report, but said he wouldn't press charges if I stayed away. The look on Dad's face when he saw me in handcuffs broke something between us. At home, the truth spilled out. Dad knew Oscar was stealing, but needed the job. Mom sobbed that we were losing the apartment anyway. I stormed out to Grandpa's empty house since it was still in escrow and started searching his office for anything about the car's ownership. That's when I found his appointment calendar. Between doctor visits were weekly meetings with S&D starting 6 months before he died. In the margins, his shaky handwriting said, confused after new pills, don't sign anything. Another note said, security camera and bird clock, check recordings. I realized he meant the ugly cuckoo clock in the shop that Michelle wanted to trash, but Dad insisted on keeping. My friend Jake helped me extract a hidden camera at 3 a.m. The SD card was corrupted, but there was some grainy footage showing Grandpa in his office looking lost, while Michelle and Oscar stood over him. She kept saying, sign here, Dad, it's for your medication schedule, while he asked, where's Tony? What is this? Oscar said, Tony needs you to sign these papers. After Grandpa signed, Oscar and Aunt Michelle smiled. Everything clicked. The most updated will was signed when Grandpa wasn't coherent, so the one before it, where he left everything to my dad, was the real one. My hands shook as I realized this was far from over, and I had no idea if this footage would be enough. Full story on channel, linked below.